Hello again, and welcome back to this session on discipleship. Bill Shoemaker is with us again today, and we're going to pick his brain about discipleship. You had mentioned a story about Jesus and the woman at the well, and Jesus being very tuned in to his mission and singles out this woman and starts her in a conversation. And he was about his business, and the disciples had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, because I do think that what happens is we get used to doing ministry a certain way. It may be tied to a culture. It may be tied to a time period and culture. And so we tend to think that we just, and we do, when pastors go to things or even church, we're always looking for the magic bullet. What does someone else do there that helped them to be successful? And if we could just import what they do, sometimes right down to dot the I, cross the T kind of duplication, and we think it will work, and it doesn't work. And you go, what's going on? So it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We wish it was. Boy, it would sure be easier. It would think that it would be easier. But it doesn't reach people because we're not all the same. For many years in education, they taught math the same way. You taught everything was the same way. Every kid is forced into one learning style. But you're an educator. What have you learned about learning styles? Is there only one? I mean, you're a professional.
Yeah, everybody's different.
What are they? What are some of the learning styles? Put you on the spot, sorry.
Oh, yeah, some people are extroverted. Some people learn by doing. Some people are introverted. They learn by listening and observing. Again, some people are hands-on. Other people learn by watching examples. They're more mimickers.
Yeah.
All sorts of different learning styles.
So if we know that when it comes to the educational system that when they were making this shift from one learning style, then I heard there are 5 learning styles. I don't even know if that encompasses all of it. But I just remember they hit 5. I do know growing up in the educational system I had dyslexia. I didn't know what it was. I just thought I was stupid. Mm-hmm. There might have been some of that. Some people say, yeah, that was true about you. But anyway, you had that. And then, because I did not learn the same way. And so it's like, some people hear better, some people see better, so there's all these different kinds. If that's true in the educational field, how about reaching people spiritually? Because you are still passing information. There is still such a thing as propositional truth. Well, you know what? Even cultures process information differently. Mm-hmm. So last November, I go to Bangladesh and India, and I'm in these tribal villages. They have very set cultures and practices. Like one time I forgot. I walked into this place that they made as their church building where they're going to gather together. I walked in with my shoes on. And anybody who's been in that culture understands that you take your shoes off and you go into their home. You certainly take off your shoes when you go into God's home, because that's how they view this. And so I walked in, and all of a sudden, everybody's eyes went where? Right down to my feet. And it's like, oh, I am so sorry. But I'm thinking, wow, I could have prevented them from ever hearing anything else I said, just because it isn't one size fits all. Mm-hmm. It's not the culture. So even when I planted Crosspoint Church a number of years ago, I wore sometimes Levi's, jeans, or I might wear Dockers. Never wore a shirt and tie, ever. And for a number of years, I never even wore shoes. I wore Birkenstock sandals. And that kind of was my shtick. It's what I kind of been made known of. But because part of it was when I'm trying to reach unchurched, and about 70% of the people who came to Crosspoint in those first few years were basically unchurched people, unfamiliar. They heard about the church, or even some of the de-churched that would come in who said, not for me. You demand that I come in looking a certain way, and we got to be just like you. And CrossPoint's motto was a safe place to try God. That we recognize that we put up a lot of barriers that keep people from seeing Jesus because we have all these other things that we've added to the environment. And we didn't want dress to be that. So if I would have continued to wear what I used to wear as a pastor, a suit and tie, dress shoes and all this, even though I'm telling my people it doesn't matter, what am I saying by my dress? It's my value. I'm going to dress this way. And I knew that to give permission to reach the segment of culture that says, hey, we can't do these hoops. I don't know what I should stand or I said. I don't know what Bible it's just all foreign to us. And I'm just not going to do this. So permission giving is to reach the culture I was trying to reach. I purposely, in order to reach them, down-dressed. It's almost like, and I tell people, it's a lot like the Bible translation or the Bible in the New Testament was not written in classical Greek. It was written in Koine Greek. It was written in the language of the day of the common people, of the market language, so the most amount of people could read it. He could have done it in classical Greek. He could have used the language of the intellectual, but then who would he have ruled out? So people will say, people say, well, you're dumbing it down. Well, could have been classical Greek, put it in Koine Greek. Why? Because he wanted to be able for anybody to understand. Yeah. So in sense, reaching people isn't one size fits all. You go back to the Great Commission. And again, I try to translate it so people don't get it mixed up, because if you ask people, what is the Great Commandment? What is the Great Commission? They'll say the Great Commission is to go. And if you study the language, you recognize that go is not a verb. It's a participle. So it doesn't carry the command. It doesn't carry the imperative. Neither does baptize. Neither does teach, because they're participles. So the one main verb that carries the imperative, carries this Great Commission command, is make disciples. So in the New American Standard, a lot of times if it was a participle, they added ing on it so that you didn't get it mixed up. So, and they do it like baptizing and teaching. You go, oh, participle. You go, yeah, okay, I get that. It's not the command. The problem is we made the go and left it like it is. And it's not. It's as you are going, make disciples. Then that next phrase fascinates me. Translations, because we don't know what to do with it, we say, of all nations. But the concept of nation did not exist in Jesus' day like that. So it's better to translate it, as you're going, make disciples. That's the imperative. That's the Great Commission of all people groups. And what comprises those people groups are the ways and the cultures and the values by which people will segregate or congregate themselves together because they're common value, common culture. So like going into Bangladesh and India and taking off my shoes. I can't go say, hey, I don't want to walk on your dirt floors. I mean, come on, they're dirty. And I'm just going to walk in like I would in church and have shoes on and just walk in and expect you all to adjust. Because I've just created a barrier for them to hear me. It's the same thing. It could be in the next street over or where you work, the blue collar, the white collar, the Hispanic, the African American, the Asian, and all of the subgroups with that. And so I've got to begin to unpack and say, I have to be able to adjust my disciple making to that culture or even that subculture of that people group, because they are going to hear differently or see things differently. We want people to come into the church and buy into our culture so that we can assimilate them into our culture, which is very unfamiliar to them. Instead of like Jesus going out amongst the people and mixing, and he did things that was radical to the Pharisees and Sadducees of his day. He went into homes where you would have avoided. What are you doing, Jesus? I think of Paul's statement, who said, I have become all things to all people for the purpose, for the mission to win some.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a man who understood. I do see in the church, we've adopted the chameleon, I call it the chameleon complex from the Old Testament, where we have learned to become all things and all people in order to hide. So we change color to blend in, not to win some, but to not stand out and be ridiculed and persecuted in the process. See, again, mission to me is so important. Do you do this to win some, or so you don't stand out and you can hide and be protected? Two very different things.
Yeah, that really jumps out when we look at that story of Jesus and the woman at the well, because he's very well aware. She has no clue what he's getting at. She eventually tunes in, but he's very intentional in that conversation. And like you had brought out in the last session, Samaria was ripe for the harvest, and Jesus saw the bigger picture, not just this woman, but her whole village.
And where did he center the conversation? He centered it with right where she was, in her culture, with a clear understanding to impact her, not where Jesus lives. He's an entirely different guy. Not even where the disciples were, because they're not from there. Mm-hmm. But he began right where she was, and he began the conversation with where she literally was, and that was water. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about where you presently are. You came down here for water. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the conversation, he says, if you would have understood, you would have asked me for water instead of me asking you for water. Oh, you don't even bring a cup, for goodness sakes. How are you going to give me water? All of a sudden, he takes this human element and creates this kairos moment of a God moment and her human moment and bridges them together to talk about something as simple as water. One that she has to come back on a regular basis because it only satiates or satisfies momentarily, much like her relationships, to talk about spiritual water to where she would never thirst again. And of course, she's going, I'm sick of coming here. This is not it's hot. I'm only here during this time of the day because I don't want to be around here all. And she wants it. But now they're going to talk about the other simple thing that is an earthly concept, is to be born again. How am I going to get back up in my mother's womb? Talk about cultural engagement of taking where this woman is with where she needs to be. Worship. She tries to take it to worship, which she thinks, okay, I can talk about this in a safe environment. I'm here. We got our temple. We got our worship. You got yours. You don't know what you're doing.
If you want to talk religion, let's talk about the controversial thing and keep it away from my heart.
Isn't that great?
Mm-hmm.
So in discipleship, in the invitation of conversation and journey in conversation, even with Jesus saying, come follow me, he takes them along, and periodically in the journey, he takes them to places that are controversial, because he knows that we have conflicting beliefs about God, about the world, and about ourselves in it, and how we're related. And so you can't just avoid controversy. Mm-hmm. There is that conversation that has to take place, and it's not always, you need Jesus as Lord, you need Jesus as Savior. I'm fascinated about this thing called discipleship, because as people come and say, what must I do to be saved? Did you notice that there's not the consistent reply from Jesus? But if we ask the average person that we encounter, the average Christian, how do you How do I become saved? We would say it's always the same message. If you just acknowledge you're a sinner, pray the sinner's prayer. Notice that wasn't in Jesus' statements. Isn't that that whoever has this discussion, why did Jesus not say, just simply believe on me and you shall be? Because Romans 10:9 and 10, that's there. But when people came to Jesus, he helped them to discover what was in them that were points and hanging points of controversy for them. We don't do that in the discipleship piece. To the rich young ruler, perfect example. Talking about the law. Well, it isn't about what Jesus knows about us. It's what we either don't know about ourselves or we do and we want to suppress and don't want to admit to. That has to become revealed. So for the rich young ruler, conversation's got to go. Hey, point of controversy. Give everything you have, give it to the poor. Done really well in all these other things. His hang-up point wasn't about knowing who Jesus was. Wasn't it? How about the soldiers? What did he say to the soldiers? Don't make them. Quit abusing your authority. Quit abusing your power. Okay, you can make them walk a mile or whatever the tradition is, but quit stealing from them. Quit robbing them. Quit oppressing them. It isn't just a matter of knowing who Jesus is. There are sticking points where we don't want to go. So, it isn't one size fits all.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in a sense, he kind of puts the response on them. Are you going to walk away or are you going to walk toward me?
Yeah.
And they were kind of forced into taking a step.
So again, you brought up another one would be, if it isn't one size fits all, then how do you bring discipleship into the church? Is that one of the underlying pieces?
Yeah, one of the questions, because most of us are still going to be involved in our churches. It's not all going to happen at the coffee shop.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, what we do as church is kind of a routine, and yet it can still be about discipleship. You can have a Sunday school class where it's just about the routine, or you can bring discipleship into your Sunday school class. You can bring disciple making into what goes on Sunday morning. You can bring disciple making into those fellowship times. There can be intentionality in your conversation in the church as well as outside the church.
Actually, I don't think it can happen without intentionality.
Right.
So I'm really glad you brought that in.
Yes.
Because if there's not intentionality, everything else will take over. It's like the tyranny of the urgent versus what's really important. It won't be long for the tyranny of urgent and all that stuff will just sweep over whatever is truly important that you ought to be working on. So intentionality is huge. So then I stop and I think, okay, so how do you bring all of that in the idea that it's not just one way or one piece or one size fits all mentality into what would that look like to bring it back, not just have it out there, okay, everybody gets that, I got to do this out here. We don't do it, but we should, okay? So if we're going to begin somewhere, we can't just have it out there and not in here too. So how are you going to bring it back in? There's got to be a change then. When I because we have what we can called monoculture in a church. We create one culture. And so when people from a different people group who might represent a smaller type of or a different kind of people group, different culture as you were, bring it in, the only way that we know how to deal with them is if they will give up their culture, at least give it up temporarily while they're with us, and assimilate into ours.
I've heard churches say, this is what we do. If you want to join us, you need to do what we do.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that's what the mission is.
Is that what discipleship is? Bringing that person in to get him to assimilate my culture? I think, honestly, that is a big chunk of what we think. Mm-hmm. And again, only because we didn't think more intentionally about what discipleship is. And it's why we dare not miss it. Because, yes, well, I've heard people say, we're inclusive. We would take anybody in. And I said, notice when they come in, they don't stay. Because you're demanding that they assimilate. It's like me getting married, and for the first couple years of my life, or 3 years, or however many years, I thought my wife was trying to assimilate me into what she thought she had grown up with, because it was a great Christian environment, great Christian home, very organized, very clean, throw away trash and don't collect, and they were just the perfect family. And she had an image of her dad. When she married me, I thought for sure she was trying to shape me to be like her dad and just assimilate me into the vision that she had for what a family was. Whereas mine was more chaotic, more free, and I was trying to pull her. And I think we were attracted to each other for those very opposite things. We see value in the different culture, and that's why we're even attracted. And then when we get together, we spend an awful lot of time trying to get that person to look like us and think like us. And the church does that.
Yeah.
So when you think, I don't care. The easiest ones are, say, Latino culture, African American culture, Caucasian, whether it's white collar, blue collar, the in-between professional collar that's kind of in between those two things. We all have our cultural identities. And one of the things last year at something I go to in Nashville with Ed Stetzer, Lifeway Research, was we had someone who was talking about how to reach Latinos, since 1 in 6, 1 in 7 babies born in America today are Latino. And they've come to this country because they do want to become part of our country. They want to be assimilated into the multiculture that we say that we are. This huge melting pot. So when they come to our churches, we might accept them if they would assimilate and just adopt our culture, our monoculture, one culture thing. But if we do something to offend, we were told by Latino people, by these leaders, these church planting leaders, they will not raise a fuss. They will not demand to be recognized and seen. They'll just quietly leave and never come back. Where there are other cultures that they might put up a fuss. They might wrestle around. They might say, hey, what about it? Wait, why can't you, will you do this? And I do this in church planting where we didn't do hymns. And I had church people from traditional mindsets. And again, I wasn't raised on hymns, but I pastored and we did all hymns when I was in legacy or traditional churches that have long histories. And so that's all I sang until I started looking at frontier stuff and reaching new people, and the music was unfamiliar, the style was different. I had people come in and say, can't you do this? Well, I'm not going to do all these things here because I'm trying to really reach the unreached. And that is unfamiliar to them. Mm-hmm. And so when we bring people in, how do you bring it into the church? If your community is represented by different people groups, are you willing to consider how to make your service more multicultural? And what would that look like?
So in other words, being willing to change what we do for a reason.
Yes, for the purpose of discipleship, for bringing people in. If you're going to be inclusive, it isn't just so you become this warm, fuzzy family. It's to set the atmosphere to where discipleship becomes a whole lot easier to pull off. So Jesus upset the Pharisees and the Sadducees because the system wasn't reaching people. The temple, perfect case. Do you remember when he cursed the tree? Mm. And people would say, wow, that was pretty mean. I mean, it was pretty selfish of Jesus. Just because it didn't give him figs that day, he cursed the tree. I mean, isn't that kind of impetuous of Jesus? I mean, what's going on there? which is finally the right question, rather than all the judgmental
Right.
statements. And I've never heard anybody get into a discussion with me, not in college, not in seminary, who ever unpacked that in its context. And it relates to disciple making and reaching people. So here he sees that the outer court is for whom? Who's supposed to be in the outer court?
The Gentiles.
The Gentiles, who are either going to be a God-fearer or thinking about being a proselyte where they'll take on the more Jewish customs and submit to circumcision and all the other ceremonial stuff, or Gentiles who just want to know more about God. But inside that outer court are all these money changers and all this. The last person that they would ever get to encounter in the outer court is God. And here, this was supposed to be about helping people encounter and know God. And it produced no fruit. So when he cursed the tree, it wasn't too long before the religious leaders say, I think he just cursed us. And they were mad. They were livid over this thing. So it wasn't about the fig tree. It was about the system who was supposed to lead people into this relationship to God so they would find a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer, if you want to pick up Old Testament analogy, a kinsman redeemer. But they rejected him. They're going to reject him. They are rejecting him. They're going to kill him. And miss it.
Yeah, the call to be involved in the process of the bearing fruit. I mean, they were, that was the point of them being the chosen people. Is not
Absolutely.
that we're the special ones, but we are the chosen vessel through whom all the world would be blessed. That's the Abrahamic covenant. And yet, over the years, Israel forgot that they were chosen for a purpose, to bless the whole world. And I think the church is in very much the same way. We've kind of made this thing about us and not so much about the Lord and his mission to reach the whole world.
Yeah, you see, you make me think of pictures, ones that say are Hollywood style or whatever, that help me to get a hold of this thing. And I can never remember the titles of things, whether it's songs or movies, Princess Diary or whatever, or it's the one where here's this kid, I don't know if if he was from an affair or whatever he's from, but he's in America, and he finds out that he's the heir to royalty. Okay, and so then they want to bring him to Genovia or bring her to Genovia, or whichever it's man or woman. Right. So they bring him in.
Princess Diary.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And so you're thinking, okay, and you do hear Christians talk about this, and it always grinds me. It always brings up chaos in my life, and I say, God, shut my mouth, don't let me go there. But we're always saying, I'm the king's kid. Now that I found out I'm the king's kid, I want the king's stuff. I have a right to the stuff and to the blessing, which always in the movies, that's not the issue, which is always interesting. Mm-hmm. But in one of these, it was like, okay, here it is. But to be a king's kid isn't to get the king's blessings. It's to understand the responsibility of the position. Mm-hmm. That always comes out in those Hollywood styles. And I'm thinking, boy, if Christians could just gather this, we might understand this thing of mission. Mm-hmm. To be the king's kid isn't about being healthy, wealthy, wise, and giving me everything and becoming the large consumer of the king's stuff. But the responsibility of being in a position of being royalty, or in those positions of being responsible for the king's people and their benefit and their welfare. Mm-hmm. That could actually convince the world that maybe this church thing really is for them. I mean, is that picture, did I express that well enough to get that picture across?
Yeah, very well. And I think it's just so important for the church to realize the centrality of mission.
Yeah.
That God is all about his mission to the world, and that the church is called to share, to be participants in that mission. That's the purpose. Like you said, it's not about the Lord and all his benefits,
Yeah.
but the Lord and his mission. And that's part of sharing in his dominion. That's now the point, that we share in his commission.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that I wrestle, and again, for a long time, until just in the last, 3-4 years. I mean, you stop and think, if I've been at this for 39 years, what does that say about the first 34? It's like, let's not go back over that with a fine-tooth comb. And I do understand there's some fear to talk about mission and vision, because the corporate world understands it. They use it, and they use it well to accomplish what they're supposed to do, and to bring all the employers and all the employees and all the managers together so that they know why they're there, so they know what they're doing and how to do it, so they can get an end product out that manufacturing firm or whatever it is and get it shipped. Whatever that means, that's the thing. So then we have people who say, so don't give me that corporate mentality. I'm not interested in mission and vision. Let's just do church. And then it looks so hodgepodge, and it's a collection of things, and it looks like a warm huddle sometimes, and it looks like it's a singspiration another time, and all these other things that it begins to look like, but we're not making disciples. But I'm going to go back to, it's not a corporate thing, it's a God thing. That God predetermined before the foundation of the world. Here are the things. Again, it's a Romans 8:28 and 29, if you like, that God works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And that interesting? Then we stop there. 8:28, that sounds so wonderful. But it's to take you somewhere. So those whom he foreknew, he predestined before the foundation of the earth, to conform us to the image of his Son. Before it all hit, before you screwed up or I screwed up, before we ever hit this planet, before the planet took all of its shape and here's this mission.
His purpose.
His purpose.
His purpose.
Yeah. I think in the Greek they call it the hina clause, the purpose clause. It's why, and that's why. It's answering why.
What's the therefore? Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I still use that a lot. So mission and vision is important. And for a long time, I couldn't keep those straight. What's a mission? What's a vision? Which is primary? Which is secondary? Which one feeds which? Aren't they just interchangeable words? And actually, I may have said that to people. Although it just seems like they're kind of interchangeable. They're not. And it wasn't until one day that God said, don't you remember the military? You ran from me, but I put you in those experiences. As part of the Romans 8:28, God works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. You didn't know it. While you were running, I was shaping you, and I was giving you experiences to help form you and give you an understanding you wouldn't have. But because you treated it as a runaway period, which I did, it's something I just wanted to forget about. Those are my bad days. Those are the days I ran from God. And God says, was there nothing redeeming out of captivity? How's that for an image?
Kind of like Jonah and the whole running away and the shipwreck and the whale. That's
Yes.
part of the story.
It is. And it's part of your story. So then I went, okay, I trained to go to war. It was 1968 through 1971. Bad time in history. That's the Vietnam era. And I lost friends in the war. I lost my nephew in the war that we were going to go into the buddy system. And he went ahead of me, and he never came back. And it's like the Army understands a mission. Clearly understand mission. And so the mission is, let's say, you're going to take Hill 51. And so they get a hold of your unit. And your mission is to take care of Hill 51. You're going to take that, no matter what else, you're going to do that. Do you care? Do they care how you do it? No. Get it done. So then, whoever your commanding officer and your non-commissioned officers get together and they say, okay, guys, our mission is to take Hill 51. How are we going to do this? So then you begin to build a strategy of how to accomplish the mission. Guess what the strategy represents? The vision. The vision is how you're going to accomplish the mission. The mission we don't get to mess with. That's not for us to decide. So many times we think it is. Well, our job is just to worship God. It's too truncated.
Or whatever we want it to be.
Whatever we want it to be. It's fellowship. It's enjoying one another's company. It's not definitive enough. It's not big enough. It is to make disciples of all people groups.
It's his mission.
It is his mission. Interestingly, I mean, this is just far-reaching fingers go out in a lot of places. So, how am I going to reach this people group? You and I on mission together to make disciples of all people groups? You go, ha! Looking at our gift mixes of the group that we have, we can come at it from this side. Somebody needs to come up over the back part of that hill. Take them by surprise. And someone else says, you know what? I'm more that out front confrontational person. My vision is we need to have an assault on the front of that hill. And you go, huh. And someone else says, I think we should cut off their supply lines because they're being fed with all kinds of terrible, rotten stuff. And if we can cut that off, maybe we can help them to be hungry for other things. So if you begin to follow this analogy, you go, whoa, one mission, different visions into how to accomplish that, and God will, in fact, can even help you with that piece. Now you see what you can corporately do together rather than trying to do this separately. Helps me immensely because when I do, get off track, I get self-centered, my ego can get in there, pride can get in there, I just get worn out and I take a different path. And then to evaluate, is this really going to take you to the place where you're intentionally accomplishing the mission of making disciples of all people groups? No. Now I got to come back. It becomes the self-correcting point of intentionality to get back on mission. So here's one of the ways that this plays out in typical church fashion that I've heard for years, and it's the one I used to really get angry over. Now I just try not to do that. I try not to explode. It's when I hear people say, because my area again is church planting, but it's really discipleship that causes church planting. It's just, how are we going to do this? We go out and start something new and we revitalize the church. It's both and. It's not either or, it's both and. So people will say, look, if we don't do this as a local church, we don't do this as a region, we don't do this as a denomination, we're going to die. And I used to explode over that conversation. And I used to say bad things like, if that's your reason for doing this, I hope to God that we die. Now, I didn't say I hope you die. I said I hope we die. Because that is not the right reason. This is not about survival. Jesus dealt with survival mentality over and over and over again in the discipleship process. Count the cost. Don't go to war without counting the cost. If you're going to follow me, you will have to deny yourself. Unless a kernel dies and falls into the ground, Paul finally got it, and he stated for him what it was like in his mind, in his life. He says, I die daily to self and survival. Because it isn't the mission to survive. The mission is to reach those who are disconnected from God in a significant way, and they're lost. That's the mission. It's not about our survival. It's about why we're here, and it isn't survival. Death should have already been dealt with in our Christian life on a daily basis. Whether it's individually, it's the individual church, it's a region, it's a whole entire denomination.
So if you're sitting under a tree monitoring your own pulse, you're not taking Hill 51, is that right?
Boy, isn't that the truth? Yes, that really is. Hey,
Is it
look,
going to keep beating?
if you're bleeding, hopefully there's other people in the trenches with you who will say, you're bleeding. We got to get you off the front. We got to repair you.
So that you can be
Go
involved
back
in
and
taking...
engaged again. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Don't shoot your wounded. Don't shoot your wounded. And there's lots of ways in which we get wounded. It's messy. This is messy. Discipleship is chaotic and messy. It really is.
One of the folks that I've come across, I know you're familiar with, that's done a good job of refocusing the church on this basic mission of discipleship is Mike Breen. And he's got some simple guidelines and simple reminders that I think can resonate with folks. And one of the basic ideas that he talks about is the process of bringing somebody else along with you, rather than just you doing the work. Finding ways to bring somebody alongside you as a way of teaching them to do what you do. Can you talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a huge issue. And there are so many pieces to kind of, again, change. If Reggie McNeil said and other people said, and it's true, and actually Cuba, before Castro took over in Cuba, he knew what needed to happen in order to make Cuba the way he thought it should be. And one is to change the language. Mm-hmm. If you change the language, you change the understanding, you can change culture. You can't use your same language and not change culture. So changing the language, using different words, different word pictures help to set the condition where you can make a choice now to actually change culture. And of course that's a very threatening piece. But one of the things that Mike Breen says, and actually there's several, and he talks about missional communities, and discipleship is the core of Mike Breen's heartbeat. And what it looks like, what it may look like in America, and why it may or may not succeed. Actually, he wrote an article, why missional communities will fail in America, and yet that's the very thing that he is a proponent of. But one of those things is never do anything alone. And what do we pastors often do? Because often in our mindset, if you have a job to get done, we know the phrase, it's easier if
you do it yourself.
You do it yourself. It takes less time. You can probably get it done just exactly the way you would like it done.
If you want a job done right,
that's right. It's an element of control. You want the job right, just do it yourself. Because we don't like any of the elongated process, especially even in our world where everything is more instant. We want fast food quicker, quicker, instant product. So to do nothing alone. And it's real hard to do that. Don't go to conferences alone. Don't get this new information alone. Don't do ministry alone. Jesus was very careful about the disciples. He didn't ever send them out alone. He sent them out by twos. It's interesting. Why do we ignore this? We make it a financial thing. Well, we can't afford to send them out by twos. We can't send out two people or two couples or whatever. We have to, we can only send one. So then we send them out, and they're like sending someone out that ends up burned out, or called out by Satan, and then he does his attack on them, and he hits them in all their weak spots. Mm-hmm. And then we go, oh, what happened? So, but Mike Breen would say, you don't do this alone. You have a team. Because There are reasons people have different gifts. There's accountability, there's somebody who has your back, and just pure production. The theory that the whole, and I can never remember what this is, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Yes. I used to call it the Pythagorean theorem, but it's not. I said that for years and found out that's not what it is. I've been saying this wrong. But I know that what I'm stating is true, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So I do this in premarital counseling. I say, what you as a female bring to the table, what you as the male bring to the table, if we kept you separate and just added this plus this, is good, but it's not the best. But if we bring the two of you together to make oneness, now this whole is greater than what you brought and you brought and just added them together. Because in the blend, in the dynamic, there is a new personality that emerges. So now here's what we get. We get what the woman brought, we get what the man brought, and we get what the new personality brings. Now you have three things, not two. That, I think, is part of the dynamic in what we need to be doing in discipleship. We got to stop doing stuff alone. Who is on your shoulder that you've invited in? So you watch what I do mentality
right.
of what Mike Breen talks about.
Yeah, and the point is not that this shut-in needs visited. Your mission is not to visit the shut-in, but to make disciples.
Yes.
And so as you visit the shut-in, you're in the process of discipling that shut-in and in the process of discipling the person that you brought with you.
Wow. Yeah.
Is that right?
Perfect. I mean, it is such a perfect description. You are so dead on. Where we treat that, of visiting the shut-in, like it is an end product. Mm-hmm. Rather than it's also to be a process that goes far beyond that and multiplies out in many ways that you are totally unaware of because God's behind it and God will direct it. And you have no clue how far that thing's going to go out. So that's in everything. No one, I mean, Jesus took the disciples everywhere. His conversation was with them on the side of the mountain. They climbed up to hear. Even though this crowd's listening, his conversation was them. And it just keeps filtering out and filtering out and filtering out. I love your description.
So Peter and John, when they get to Acts, Jesus has ascended to the Father and Pentecost happens. But in a sense, they've already been there and done that because the Lord had already taken them out.
It does raise another issue when you say that. I don't know if you can cut me off and say, I don't want you to go there. Is in the fivefold ministry things. When you think about the Ephesians 4 passage,
yes.
And you think about the idea of the partnering under this, and previously in that passage in Ephesians 4, it talks about the 7 things we have in common: one faith, one baptism, one Father, and all those things. So and there's the diversity. There's unity in the diversity, but it's underneath this one thing that we all have in common. And then it talks about these fivefold gifted people of what they're supposed to be doing to equip God's people to do the work of ministry until we all reach a couple things. One, the unity of the faith, and maturity where Christ is the head. Yeah. So the whole body's pulling together under one head and functioning in maturity and not being tossed about by everything that comes along like we typically are. Mm-hmm. You go, okay, so when you look at those fivefold partnering relationships with the church, we've not done that well. Mm-hmm. Because they're equipping ministries. So let's just start. Basic understanding. The apostle, the frontier person. And if he just goes out on his own and does the frontier, and even Paul, by the way, didn't ever go alone, did he? Always had people going with him and discipling, actually. And we get the funny story about Mark when he goes, no, I'm going to miss my mommy. That's an exaggeration. oh, go away, just forget it. Barnabas comes alongside, takes him, and of course later Paul says, hey, send him.
Yeah.
He has value to me. I've seen what's happened. Okay, let's bring him back into the fold. But anyway, you get the apostles who are really those frontier people. Well, one of the questions is, what does that look like for equipping in a church? The apostle comes in and helps to equip and train people. How do you take new territory for God?
So it's not just like a missionary that we send to India. It could be the outgoing person that is the path cutter into that new development or into the trailer park or into the...
Yes. See, I didn't even know that was me until my wife and other people say, you really don't know yourself very well, do you? Because I'm doing evangelistic Bible studies in a new suburb that was developing in Fort Wayne. I just thought that's what everybody should be doing. Didn't know that was my unique giftedness. I did evangelistic Bible studies for businessmen in the morning. I mean, it's just kind of how I roll. Didn't realize that I needed to not just do it, but to be teaching other people, how do you break new ground?
Yeah.
So my wife would always say, how come you could go talk to a tree and convert a tree? Is there anything you can't talk to? Well, I've not run into anything. Because it is a piece of my giftedness, and I should be training other people how to break into new territory. Here are questions you ask. Here are the things you listen for, the things you observe.
Right. So what you're saying is that's not your job because you're gifted that way, but it's your job to teach those things because you're gifted that way.
Preach it. Preach it, teach it, because you're absolutely right. And you can go right down those fivefold ministry things and say, okay, there's apostles, there's prophets, people who have an extra ability to listen to God and what is God saying. What if, instead of just getting out there and they're all on their own and they're just shouting what God's saying, is, why don't you teach me how to hear God? Do you remember the story of Samuel and Eli? Here's this young lad. He didn't know how to distinguish God's voice from Eli's voice or anyone else's voice. But it finally dawned on Eli. Go back to bed, son. But here's what you do. You ask, Lord, it's you. Here I am. I'm listening. Your servant's listening. Go ahead. I now know it's your voice. Where are the prophets who don't just in isolation do their thing, but help us to distinguish God's voice from everyone else's in hearing, thus saith the Lord? The evangelist. How do I become a better witness where I am? How do I invite people to tell the story? And how do I learn to tell my story better? That's equipping. Evangelists. I've been at this long enough. Every denomination I know from my early days of Christianity hired denominational evangelists and sent them out. Somehow missed the equipping piece of the Ephesians 4. They were supposed to be helping us, to equip us to be witnesses. You can go right on down. Pastor, teacher. How are they equipping us to learn? Well, for the pastor, so he doesn't, again, if the numbers are accurate, if a single pastor can take care of around 100 people, 125 max. What happens when your church is 300, 500, 10,000? Wow. He cannot take care of everybody. How does he take his shepherding gift and raise up all these other shepherds to learn for the body to care for the body? To be shepherds that take care of one another.
Caregivers.
Small group, care groups. Or the teacher. Where's the teacher that helps to say, this is God's word, here's the questions you ask, here are the learning principles and the teaching principles of how to communicate truth in such a way that people can interact better with observation, interpretation, application. Where is that happening? Rather than he keeps going to the barrel and he keeps teaching and teaching and teaching, and we keep taking and taking and taking, and he's not multiplying and helping other people to know and equip us for this. So we burn them all out.
So in a sense, you're saying this is the way out of the certain people doing the ministry and the rest of us being spectators.
Absolutely.
This is the way to where of us all becoming participants and the church equipping us toward that end.
Exactly. And notice that it falls under the mission of making disciples. Because you remember the Ephesians 4 passage? Until we all attain to the unity of faith and we all come under the headship of Christ and we fall in underneath him as he's being formed in us. It is just another way to say this is a discipleship piece.
Yeah.
It's huge. We've not been real effective at doing this. And I said, when I ever say this, I say we. It's we. Mm-hmm. This isn't you. This is me. This is the we, the corporate we together. Have not been good at this. And again, I think we're having wrong conversations. It's how can I get more people in? How can I fix budget? Is there better things that we can have for survival?
Yeah.
There's such emergency questions.
Yeah, as you were talking, I think it was in the last session, I had an illustration come to mind. You were talking about there are so many generals and other officers, but there's no army.
Yeah.
And I was picturing, what would we think of a school district if they kept hiring administrators to work in the offices, but there was nobody to spend time with the kids, and therefore nobody teaching?
Or if you just take a little slice of that pie, and any of you who are in the school system, any of you who are school counselors, you'll get this. That all of a sudden, a school counselor is supposed to engage the kids. When they originally created that position, it was to help kids. Most school counselors tell me, I don't get to talk to any kids. I don't get to see kids. I'm always filling out paperwork. And you go, oh, yes. That's exactly the issue.
It would be the same too with nurses, always doing paperwork and no time with their patients.
Sure.
It tends to go this way, and yet it's important to recognize that's not the mission. That's not the intent. It's not the purpose.
Yeah. So therefore, if you get only people on that administrative thing, and again, there are people who are uniquely gifted for that.
Yes.
But for goodness sakes, don't take the people who are supposed to engage on this level and make it everything about this level. There are people uniquely gifted. But it's like we want to squeeze more and more out of people and make them actually work in areas they're not called to. They're off mission. They're off vision. And it's like, really?
Yeah. I've spent a lot of years in a nursing home. And one of the things that's been very clear to me is the people that spend most of the time with our residents are the nurses' aides, because they're the ones that are the actual caregivers. They're the ones that are the lowest ones on the totem pole, and they get mistreated by a lot of folks. But the fact is that the residents know them better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's true of our churches. I mean, the pastor's not going to be in everybody's workplace. He's lucky if he's in anybody's workplace, if he's a busy pastor. But
oh, absolutely.
But we're there. You're there. And that's where God planted you. And that's his design, is to bloom where you're planted.
Absolutely.
And to make disciples where he's put you.
Yeah. And he has gifted us for that.
Exactly.
He really has. And we who are, quote, in leadership, unquote, again, I almost don't even like the term anymore, need to be helping people how to engage on mission. And making sure that even as we're doing that, we're bringing other people along and making disciples, but also training leaders. Now, I have this double thing. Not only do I need to be discipling, I need to be training leadership as well as I'm doing these things. And, boy, the hardest part is then to help the person that I'm discipling to duplicate that so that he then becomes a discipler, and he does it in such a way that his disciple becomes a discipler, so that multiplication takes place. The statistics are not good in this area when it comes to church planting. We get a church planter, and he understands what he needs to say about multiplication. Do you know most of them never go to the second level of where they multiply? Because they build their kingdom. It's a negative term. They build their kingdom or their fiefdom. And now they've got their position, and they don't continue the process of disciple making and reproduction and multiplying.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate piece. That's why discipleship, by the way, is the mission. Church planting is one of the ways to accomplish it, but church planting is not an end in itself, and it is not the mission. It's a vision of how to accomplish the mission.
Yeah, it's important to remember that there's just one church, and
Yes.
it's about Him and His kingdom, and not just our little, like you said, fiefdom.
Yeah.
So as we wrap this session up, is there anything else that you would like?
Hey, you want a challenge?
Yes.
Okay, here it is. Trying to think of the best way to leave it, the best way to say it. Maybe a little new or radical. And if I'm wrong, somebody call me and tell me I'm wrong, and I'll say, okay, yeah. The mission is to make disciples. If I transfer what I think that is and put another phrase in there, it gets me off. And it's this: my job is not to build the church. So many times I think we have got those two transposed, and we think our job is to build a church. And it's not. What I've discovered is when I think it's my job to build a church, it is my church. And it is not Jesus' church. And then the disciples that I make are not Jesus' disciples, they are my disciples. How do I know? Because when I leave, what happens?
They leave too.
They leave too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same for any person who identifies with the church. If they say, this is my church, which you people say, that's my church. No, not really. When did Jesus sign the deed over to you? He didn't. It's His church. If I'm on mission making disciples, guess what that leaves Jesus to do? Which He says He will do.
I will build my church.
Yeah, I will build my church. Do your job, I'll do my job. Don't try to do my job or you'll end up with something that's not mine but yours. So my challenge is, what does it mean to you to understand that Jesus says, I will build my church. You go make disciples. Don't get them confused. So the question then is, have I been busy making this my church? Whether you're a pastor, a planter, the laity, which I hate the term and it shouldn't be there, the person in the seat, in the pew, have I been making this my church? Or making it Jesus' church? Mm-hmm. That's the challenge. Well, I can't answer that for anybody. I can only answer it for me. You can only answer it for you. Mm-hmm. They can only answer it for themselves. Have I been making and contributing to making this my church or Jesus? Challenge.
Quite a challenge. Quite a challenge, but it'll be a clarifying one when
Hopefully.
we take that question seriously.
Hopefully.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again.
Hey, it's a deal. Thank you. Again, to be able to talk for 2 hours about my passion, about this thing, it feeds my soul. It just gets me all fired up. And it actually helps me to maintain intentionality of why I am here. Otherwise, I get distracted, just like anybody else, or discouraged. That happens. So this just fires me up. Thanks for the conversation.
Yep, well, thank you for sharing your passion with us.
Thanks.